Imagine getting a text message at like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, yeah. We've all had that sinking feeling, right?
Right. Your phone lights up the dark room, you squint at the screen, and it's just this furious 1,000-word demand for, I don't know, 20 euros you allegedly owe for a phone top-up.
Which is incredibly annoying, sure. I mean, you've probably been on the receiving end of a stressful text thread before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the next message drops, and suddenly, right between a complaint about a bank payment and an eyebrow tattoo,
Yeah.
the sender literally blames you for a death.
Yeah, and that creates an immediate sense of emotional whiplash.
Totally.
You are forcefully dragged from the absolute most mundane logistics of daily life straight into the abyss of human mortality.
It's wild. And today, we are opening up a digital artifact that does exactly that.
Yeah.
So welcome to our deep dive. We're looking at a document that's simply titled amen.pdf.
Right. And what this is at its core is a chaotic barrage of translated WhatsApp messages.
From an individual that we are only going to refer to today as a lost soul.
Yeah, we're keeping it anonymous. And the mission here isn't just to gawk at someone else's digital meltdown. We're doing this because decoding this document, it's really a masterclass in understanding how unresolved emotion, financial stress, and profound trauma actually rewire the way human beings communicate.
Because when the brain is under that kind of extreme duress, the language it produces stops being about conveying information, doesn't it?
Exactly. It starts acting as a deeply flawed defense mechanism.
Okay, so let's look at the actual messages. On the surface, a lost soul is hitting the recipient with this relentless fragmented accounting of financial and moral failures.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
The timeline jumps all over the place. Like they demand money for an unpaid phone top-up. Then in the next breath, they pivot to a booking paid at a place called Las Rosas via email.
Right, very specific.
And then they bring up outstanding monthly payments to BBVA Recoletos, specifically citing July 24th. It is just this dizzying, toxic, emotional audit.
Notice how hyper-specific those financial details are, though? July 24th. Las Rosas via email.
Yeah, why do that?
Well, when someone is experiencing an internal loss of control, their brain desperately clings to external metrics, things that can be quantified and proven.
But wait, I want to push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Couldn't it just be that they actually need the money? I mean, if I am broke and struggling, an unpaid bank bill from July 24th isn't some abstract proxy for emotional control. It's a real crisis.
Fair point.
So how do we know they aren't just furiously trying to collect a literal debt?
That is a completely fair assumption to make at first glance. But the differentiator here, the tell that this is psychological rather than purely financial, is what the sender pairs those debts with.
Okay.
If it were just about liquidity, right, the text would focus on the cash. Instead, a lost soul weaves these debts into sweeping, devastating character assassinations.
Oh, right. Like they tell the recipient they are, quote, utterly lacking as a human being.
Exactly. They clarify that the money owed isn't just a generic sum. They specifically itemize it.
Right. They mentioned the eyebrow tattoo of the Brazilian nail lady.
Yes.
And the school lady, where someone named Daniel studied, which is such an absurdly specific list of grievances, like, you owe me for the Brazilian nail lady's eyebrow tattoo.
It's wild. And it gets darker. The sender then tells the recipient that they must be longing for sexual healing because the men in their life were trash.
See, that's where the just trying to collect a debt theory completely falls apart for me.
Right.
You don't bring up sexual healing and trash men if you just want your BBVA Recoletos payment cleared. It feels like the currency they're actually dealing in is guilt.
Yeah, let's look at the mechanism behind that. In behavioral psychology, we see this phenomenon where people keep an injustice ledger.
An injustice ledger.
Yeah. When someone feels profoundly betrayed, but they lack the emotional vocabulary to articulate the depth of that betrayal, they substitute it with microdebts.
Oh, wow. So a financial debt is just easier to argue about.
Exactly. It's a very clean, culturally accepted form of leverage. If you owe me for a phone top-up, you are fundamentally indebted to me. It is a tangible way to maintain the upper hand.
And keep the recipient tethered to the conflict.
Precisely.
So the microdebts are the hook, and the character attacks are the actual venom. They are trying to destabilize the recipient so they can't defend themselves.
You nailed it. And we see this escalate with the introduction of third-party trauma.
Oh gosh, the Milana tangent.
Yes.
If you're reading this document, it completely derails you. A lost soul suddenly starts detailing how this woman, Milena, got her citizenship, How she had her kid in one room and worked in another.
It's so much information all at once.
Right. They mention she is fresh out of prison, dealing with domestic abuse from the dad of one of her kids. And then, this is the kicker, they mention Milena setting up a pink crystal silk duvet in an apartment the sender rented out.
Just think about the cognitive load of that image. The pink crystal silk duvet juxtaposed against prison and domestic abuse.
Why do that, though? Why bring up the tragic life story of a completely different person down to her bedding in the middle of a fight about bank payments?
It is a psychological tool called the contrast effect. By parading Milena's severe struggles, prison, abuse, single motherhood, the sender is establishing a hierarchy of suffering. They're essentially saying, look at what real struggle looks like. Look at how hard Milena works for her pink duvet. Now look at yourself, failing to even pay for an eyebrow tattoo.
Wow. So it weaponizes someone else's trauma to amplify the recipient's perceived inadequacy.
Exactly. It's very manipulative.
Okay, so you're reading this and you're thinking you've got a handle on the dynamic. It's a bitter, petty dispute driven by someone using an injustice ledger to inflict guilt.
Right.
But if this is all an elaborate architecture of control, why does the sender suddenly introduce a detail that proves they have absolutely no control over their universe at all?
Yeah, this is the pivot point of the entire document.
The ledger of debts abruptly cracks wide open,
Yeah.
and the text just hemorrhages raw, completely unprocessable grief.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, the messages pivot to a father figure who has died. A lost soul laments that his dad died with all that money. And they type with all these exclamation points that he didn't make it past summer.
It recontextualizes every single word that came before it.
It really does. It totally flipped my understanding of the text. Amidst all the yelling about bank payments and pink duvets, there is this one devastating line. The sender mentions leaving 20 euros for a Romanian man to buy a funeral wreath for the dad.
The 20 euros for the wreath. That detail is the emotional anchor of the entire document.
It stopped me in my tracks. Because at first, a lost soul just sounds incredibly attacking and vindictive.
Sure.
But when you hit the funeral wreath line, you realize the anger is just a bodyguard for this massive, crushing grief.
And anger is a highly effective, albeit primitive, bodyguard.
Right.
What we are witnessing in these messages isn't just a financial dispute. It is a real-time manifestation of mourning.
Which we don't usually see like this.
No, we have this societal expectation that mourning is supposed to look a certain way. Quiet crying, solemn reflections, wearing black. But the reality of complex grief is that it is often loud, frantic, and deeply aggressive.
But how does the brain actually go from, my father figure died, to, you owe me for a phone top-up? Like, what is the mechanical link there?
It comes down to cognitive dissonance and how our nervous system processes threat.
Okay.
When someone experiences a sudden, profound loss, the brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, gets flooded with cortisol.
Just a massive stress response.
Right. The brain physically cannot process the randomness and unfairness of mortality. Death is an unsolvable equation. You cannot argue with it.
No.
You cannot negotiate a payment plan with it.
So it feels like a massive system failure.
Exactly. And the brain hates unsolvable problems because they trigger a prolonged state of helplessness. So to lower those cortisol levels and regain a sense of agency, the brain subconsciously rewires that existential anxiety into a solvable problem.
Oh, wow.
It displaces the aggression. I cannot fight the fact that the father figure died before the end of summer, but I absolutely can fight you over a July 24th BBVA payment.
That is fascinating. So the argument is essentially a subconscious life raft. It creates the illusion of agency in a situation where they are completely powerless.
Yes. And you can see how heavily the burden of survivor's guilt is weighing on them, too.
Oh, yeah. They mentioned the recipient's ex is still alive.
Right. And they point out that some undercover cop's girlfriend is still alive. The text literally screams, and he isn't.
Yeah. They revere the deceased as the boss of all of them.
Which is such a raw expression of the brain trying to categorize fairness. It's asking, why do the bad or irrelevant people get to live, but the boss doesn't?
The brain is desperately seeking a target to blame for this imbalance.
Exactly. And the sender also brings up these very specific memories to anchor their pain.
I was going to ask about that. In the middle of this rant, they talk about drinking a Coca-Cola with the recipient when the undercover cop's girlfriend arrived, and a memory about a phone at a burger place where the deceased looked for them. Why stop to talk about a burger place?
Well, when someone goes through a traumatic loss, their internal timeline shatters into two distinct eras: before the death and after the death.
Okay.
Mentioning the Coca-Cola or the burger place isn't just random reminiscing. It is a desperate attempt to force the recipient to acknowledge the before.
Oh, wow.
It's a way of saying, you were there, you existed in the timeline when the world still made sense, you have to bear witness to what I lost.
So they're essentially trying to organize the pure chaos of death into a spreadsheet of debts and specific memories.
It's the only way they can conceptualize keeping their head above water.
It's just incredibly heavy. We have the bitter, petty debts of the present on one hand. We have the crushing grief of the past on the other. And caught right in the middle, a lost soul does something else entirely. They turn their focus to a lost future. They start weaponizing what could have been.
This is a fascinating psychological pivot. They move from mourning a real death to mourning a hypothetical life.
Right. The sender literally drops a YouTube link into this chaotic chat. It's a link to a food place. And they claim that if the recipient had only been reliable, they could be feeding people and making an income together.
They are constructing a highly detailed alternate reality.
Yeah, in this alternate timeline, the sender claims the recipient would be sitting comfortably in their loft without any issues, and the sender could be wherever the F I wanted.
It's a whole fantasy.
And they challenge the entire reality of their partnership. They ask, can you imagine if we'd gone in to eat? What were you going to pay with? They talk about sorting out something called La Chopra and then cryptically ask what comes next, the Domino's pizza thing or the police thing.
Notice how vivid the architecture of this fantasy is. The loft, La Chopra, feeding people.
I hear people use the sliding doors analogy for this kind of thing, like that movie where one small change alters your whole life.
Right.
But that feels too passive. This feels more aggressive. To me, it feels like a financial derivative. A lost soul is essentially trying to cash in on an emotional insurance policy for a future that never actually vested.
Oh, I love that.
They're saying, I am owed for the success of this restaurant we never opened. Why do we do that? Why do we weaponize potential?
The financial derivative analogy is brilliant here. What you are describing is a defense mechanism known as compensatory projection.
Compensatory projection. Okay, what does that mean?
When the current reality, in this case, grieving a dead father figure and obsessing over a 20-euro funeral wreath, is too painful to inhabit, the ego constructs a utopian alternative.
But why involve the recipient in the utopia, especially if you think they're terrible?
Because the fantasy requires a scapegoat to explain why it isn't real. If a lost soul just admits that opening a restaurant is hard and they didn't have the capital, well, that's an internal failure. But if they say, we would have had this restaurant, but your unreliability ruined it, that shifts the totality of the blame.
Oh, I see.
It serves a dual purpose. It allows the sender to avoid confronting their own current unhappiness, and it places the responsibility for their ruined future squarely on the shoulders of the recipient.
It absolves them. They get to be the brilliant visionary who is tragically held back by a flawed partner.
Exactly. And look at the rhetorical questions they use. What were you going to pay with? That isn't a genuine inquiry about finances.
No, not at all.
That is designed to humiliate. It translates to, you are fundamentally inadequate, and your inadequacy cost me my dream. Mourning a hypothetical restaurant is infinitely easier for the human ego than sitting with the messy reality of a broken relationship and complex grief.
Man, it is an exhausting roller coaster.
Yeah.
If you are on the receiving end of this, if you are reading these translated messages, you are being battered by toxic projection, hyper-specific microdebts, and explosive, unmanaged grief.
It's relentless.
It feels like there is no way out of the loop.
But then the source document offers this profound, radical shift in tone. It gives us a blueprint for how to actually survive this exact kind of digital bombardment.
Yeah.
The final section of the document is a complete structural and emotional departure from the WhatsApp messages.
It really is. The document ends with a final paragraph that is addressed directly to someone named Mike. And the tone shifts entirely, pivoting on a single word, amen.
Amen. It's an invocation of absolute finality, a closing of the ledger.
It reads like a grounding final word on the entire chaotic journey. It validates that Mike has looked at the situation with, quote, total honesty, that he has honored a deep spiritual connection and ultimately chosen a path of true self-love and peace.
It acts as an antidote to the poison in the preceding texts.
Yeah, it literally commands Mike to stand firm as that unshakable rock, to trust the boundaries he's built, and to let his mind rest in a quiet sanctuary. And it ends with this incredibly reassuring phrase, you've got this, Mike.
What an astonishing contrast, from the frenzy of the Brazilian nail lady and the undercover cop, right to the stillness of an unshakable rock.
To me, reading this, it felt like the ultimate internal mic drop. It is like stepping out of a Category 5 hurricane directly into a soundproof room.
That's a great way to put it.
The wind is still howling outside. The WhatsApp messages are still pinging. The accusations are still flying. But inside, there's just silence. But I want to know the mechanics of that. How does building a quiet sanctuary actually work when someone is actively trying to tear you down?
It comes down to the critical difference between external validation and internal closure. When you are confronted with an injustice ledger like we saw earlier, the instinctual human response is to engage.
Of course. I mean, if someone accuses me of ruining a hypothetical restaurant, my immediate instinct is to fire back and say, I didn't ruin anything, we never even had a lease.
Right, we all want to correct the record. But in behavioral psychology, responding to this kind of chaotic distress creates what we call a variable ratio reinforcement schedule.
Yeah.
A variable ratio reinforcement schedule. If you reply even just to defend yourself, you feed the feedback loop.
Oh, good.
You validate the sender's premise that the argument is open for debate. You become an active participant in their displaced aggression.
So by defending yourself, you accidentally legitimize their toxic audit.
Yes. What this addendum to Mike demonstrates is the power of a hard boundary. True closure, especially when dealing with someone else's unmanaged trauma, rarely comes from an apology. You will never argue your way to peace with someone who is weaponizing a pink duvet.
Yeah, that's never going to happen.
So internal closure means accepting the apology you are never going to receive.
Stand firm as that unshakable rock.
Building that rock isn't about punishing the sender. It isn't the silent treatment. It is a unilateral declaration of peace.
I love that.
It is recognizing that the sender's emotional world is spiraling completely out of control and making the conscious choice that you do not have to spiral with them. You cannot control the storm they are experiencing, but you alone control the architecture of your shelter.
Which is such a vital framework to understand. If you've ever found yourself trapped in a digital argument that seems to defy logic, you know exactly how suffocating it feels.
Yep.
Look, you might not be dealing with someone demanding BBVA receipts or bringing up the citizenship status of a woman named Milena or reminiscing about burger places. Those details are wildly specific to a lost soul. But the mechanics of this conflict are universal.
They really are. We all navigate chaotic communications. We all face the reality of emotional overload in a digital age where someone else's unhealed trauma can vibrate in our pocket at any given second.
Yeah, and this deep dive serves as a magnifying glass on human frailty. It shows us the exact psychological gears turning when profound grief collides with mundane financial stress. It reveals how the brain displaces pain, how we weaponize the future to avoid the present, and how messy we become when we are hurting.
It also gives us a clear choice, though. We can engage in the chaos or we can choose the sanctuary.
Which leaves us with this stark contrast to consider. On one side of this document, you have a mind trapped in endless looping grievances, a lost soul desperately trying to balance a ledger that can never be closed. And on the other, you have a mind that has actively chosen a quiet sanctuary. And it makes you wonder, wait, I shouldn't say that. It makes you really think, in a world where our communications are instantaneous, where every furious text, every displaced piece of anger, and every fragmented expression of grief is permanently archived in the cloud, what does it do to the human psyche to know that these painful moments never really disappear?
That's a heavy thought.
They just sit there, frozen in data, waiting for someone to scroll up. Maybe the ultimate superpower isn't just putting the phone down. Maybe it's finding the grace to let the digital ghost rest and refusing to let a permanent archive dictate your present peace.